We'll give just a few minutes for folks to keep logging in. We'll go ahead and give it about one more minute for folks to come in. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So hello and welcome to Moving to End Sexual Assault, Cultivating Safe Digital Spaces for Youth, Exploring Best Practices panel. I'm really excited to introduce our guest panelists tonight who share a wealth of experience and knowledge in cultivating digital youth spaces. Just a reminder, we are recording this event and that recording will be going out to attendees next week. We have also enabled closed captioning, so if you would like subtitles, please select the CC logo on the bottom right of your screen. And then before we begin, I'd like to introduce myself, Moving to End Sexual Assault, also known as MESA, and give a little bit of information about why we're here tonight. So my name is Alex Vitesta. I'm a sexual violence prevention educator with MESA, and I'll be moderating tonight's panel. MESA is Boulder County Sexual Violence Resource Center, and we offer both client services and prevention and education trainings. We're holding this panel in support of Sexual Assault Awareness Month and chose the topic in alignment with the National Sexual Violence Resource Center's national theme for 2022, which is building safe online spaces together. Sexual Assault Awareness Month is a time to highlight prevention efforts, including broad strategies for digital Gen Z engagement. What we're most curious about is how practitioners can use the concepts of digital consent and online safety to empower the youths we serve. So we also want to recognize that these topics may bring things up for people attending tonight. So I want to remind you all that MESA's 24/7 hotline is available at 303-443-7300. My colleague Chantel Daniels is with us and will be monitoring the Q&A and providing technical support. She will also post our hotline number in lieu of her name for ease of access here in just a moment. Participants are encouraged to submit questions to the Q&A box throughout the panel, and we will leave time at the end to answer any submissions. that being said, I'm really excited to introduce tonight's panelists. So on the panel, we have Lily Berlin. Lily is one of Boulder County's youth program assistants. They currently facilitate young adult groups and have specific experience facilitating online youth spaces, in addition to overseeing the youth vaccine internship. She is also a sophomore doing her undergraduate at Metropolitan State University in Denver, and is extremely excited to speak at this panel hosted by MESA. We also have Raymond Garcia, who is the Creating Protective Environments Project Coordinator with the Safe House Progressive Alliance for Nonviolence, also known as SPAN, in Boulder, Colorado. Ray is devoted to violence prevention and SPAN's mission of ending violence through creating safer spaces for local youth with the support of youth advisors. Ray utilizes hotspot mapping to learn about where young people feel safe and unsafe, generating youth-led discussions and recommendations to present to decision makers. Ray has a background in sociology, education, advocacy, and violence prevention, and loves spending time outside hiking, biking, and skiing. We also have Jax Gonzalez, who is the Oasis Program Coordinator for Boulder County Public Health and oversees the Youth Advocating for Change program, also known as YAC. Jax has been collaborating with LGBTQ youth and adults since 2014 and is passionate about co-creating a world where marginalized youth thrive and feel affirmed. A strong advocate for community partnerships and anti-oppressive practices in youth service, Jax believes that youth's capacity to dream is a valuable resource in the fight for collective liberation. Jax is a PhD candidate in sociology at the University of Colorado Boulder, where they recently completed a master's in education, curriculum, and instruction in 2021. Previous to Colorado, they received a dual master's in sociology, gender and sexuality studies at Brandeis University in 2016. Their academic focus has been on understanding and identifying solutions to educational inequality that are rooted in anti-racist and queer practices. Jax has called Colorado home for 6 years, and when they aren't working on their dissertation, they throw pottery, explore, and play with their tiny dog, Nora. Accompanying Jax is Sienna Panisi. Sienna is a sophomore in high school and a member of the Youth Advocating for Change program. We also have Annika Spildy, who is representing the group BVSD survivors. She is a passionate senior at Fairview High School who has been active in the effort to call for change from Boulder Valley School District. She has helped organize 2 walkouts at Fairview in support of survivors of sexual violence, created and presented mandatory reporting trainings to staff, and is currently a member of the newly created Title IX Advisory Council. She's looking forward to furthering her social impact and studying political science next year in college. So, thank you all so much for being here, and let's go ahead and dive in. So, our first question tonight is to briefly tell us about the online space or spaces that you provide and why you chose the platform you selected. To begin, I will start with you, Lily.
Sweet, thank you, Alex. So at Boulder County, we started doing online spaces via Zoom for our LGBTQ youth middle school group, high school group, and QTs with Oasis. And that we just followed what the district was doing. So they were going all online. So we decided to go all online. Because many youth find youth groups a very affirming space to be LGBTQ, find friends, especially isolation during COVID. So having a space where youth can play games, hang out virtually, spaced away from each other was really important. And yeah, so we primarily used Zoom, and we've done many intersectionality based events via Zoom as well. So we hosted our annual Lunar New Year event via Zoom, which was really amazing because we had people from all across the United States join. We actually had someone from Great Britain join our Lunar New Year event, which was amazing. Never knew that someone from the UK would find our event via that. But yeah, it was really just great. A bunch of LGBTQ Asians collecting together, making origami via Zoom. I think that was really amazing. And just helped cultivating space for the intersectionality between LGBTQ and being people of color. And we also hosted a virtual Day of the Dead event. So just a lot of different opportunities for those intersectionalities to find community.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Lily. Jax or Sienna?
We recently started using GatherTown for our Yak meetings, which is this, like, I think Jax described it as a mix of Minecraft and Google Meets or something like that. It's like this really cool platform where you design your own character and your characters all walk around and you can talk to each other. You can also design the whole, like, the space that you are walking around in. So it's kind of like more of a personalized type of thing. I don't know. I really like it. It's been it was a lot better than Zoom for me, or Meet or whatever we were using before, because it felt more like how in person feels and how being in person, and like, because you can walk up to somebody and talk to them and nobody else can hear your conversation. Like I don't know. It's kind of like that. Jax, do you have anything to add?
I think you did a really great job explaining it and explaining what the benefits are. I'll also share that it's a free platform to use as long as you have 25 people or under on it. However, it is not approved to be used with folks 12 and under. The GatherTown system doesn't suggest that. So you should be aware of that when planning programming for youth. But as you heard from Sienna, it's a really incredible way to create a more playful space online instead of just being in these boxes. And I've definitely seen that across our programming. We've also utilized it in the QT space as well.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing. And I know when I met with you all in that space, I was really surprised by it. And I felt like I was in a little video game. And so the way you described being able to walk up to someone, I could legitimately watch someone like fade out of the conversation when they started walking away. So definitely cool to hear about that. Ray?
Thanks, Alex. We provide a pretty wide variety of programming online through our Peers Building Justice After School Club. We provide prevention education online when necessary. All of our internal meetings are still being held online. We're starting to transition back to a more hybrid platform. My hotspot mapping sessions are conducted online mostly still, as well as our counseling team runs art therapy, yoga sessions, and LGBTQIA+ teen focus, support groups online. And we use a pretty wide variety of platforms to host those things. BVSD has asked that we use Google Meets to host our prevention education sessions. We also use Google Meets to host our Peers Building Justice program. Both of those are hosted on Google Meets. They're largely the most accessible, both for young people as well as for us. They're free and they don't require a download to use. And the user interface is pretty simple. All of our internal meetings are held on Teams for security reasons. And then hosting other external meetings, we use Zoom because we have a lot of agency over who gets to participate in those sessions, as well as some other security factors built in. Zoom does have its limitations, being paid after a certain amount of time, number of people involved. But for us, for these external activities supporting young people, it's usually our go-to.
Perfect, thank you. And Annika?
Yeah, so I'm also a member of the Yak, so I've used GatherTown. I love GatherTown. I love how it feels like a video game, and it just reminds me of having fun like in person but digitally. But I also, with BDSD survivors, we primarily have used Instagram as our main platform of kind of communicating. And I'm sure all of you have used Instagram to communicate with youth and to share information, but we found that Instagram is a really great way to like disseminate information faster to like a broader group of people in a bigger population. And I feel like it's been pretty successful in being able to keep people informed and like spread awareness about our specific issue of sexual violence, specifically within Boulder Valley School District.
So a follow-up with that, Annika, actually two. One is, do you primarily do posts or stories or both for that engagement?
We primarily do posts. We've done some stories. Stories kind of can help add to that, but I found that posts, in terms of the way we're sharing information, is the most helpful. Yeah.
Awesome. And my second follow-up is, does BPSD survivors screen or edit any of the submissions that you receive from survivors?
So we don't, or well, we try not to. We always edit out if people leave clarifying information in, or like identifying information in their stories. We ask people not to include that in their submissions because we're sharing anonymous stories of sexual violence within BVSD. And we don't want it to be that they get mandatory reported because they kept something in there, because our goal is to anonymously share awareness of this issue and to give survivors a place to feel heard without running into the issue of being mandatory reported. But so we'll edit out clarifying or identifying information. And then I've had a couple where we felt like we needed to cut it down a tiny bit because you only have you had 10 slides on Instagram to share something. So when you get the text just being way too tight, we've edited out a little bit for like clarity and conciseness, but generally we try not to edit anything because we want to leave survivor stories as intact as possible.
Absolutely, that definitely makes sense. So the second question we have is, what benefits and limitations have you identified with online or digital engagement generally, and or with your specific platforms? So let's go ahead and start with Jax or Sienna on this one.
Yeah, I'm curious what Sienna thinks. As someone who was teaching early in the pandemic, and as someone who's deeply dedicated to creating space where you feel affirmed and excited to be there, I think one of the biggest challenges is just the fatigue of being on a screen all day, right? We wanted to continue to create space after school for youth to see and connect with other youth that shared their identities. And the feedback continues to be, to this day, I'm just kind of done being on a screen. So yeah, Sienna, I wonder how you feel about that.
Yeah, I am definitely done being on a screen, I think. We just like, I didn't start high school in person. I started high school online. So it was a really it was a big change, and it was all just online all the time. And then I joined Yak and it was also online. So we just it's kind of like a repetitive thing that it just for me at least, the biggest factor of it not being as important or influential as being in person is the connections that you can make with people, because it's really hard to make those connections through a screen, especially when you're in a Google Meet or something, because then there's a bunch of other people. You can't walk off and be like, hey, what's your name? To some one single person, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely it does. So I would love to follow up with you all real quickly around how have you created those relationships, especially for folks who have been new in the group and really tried to build those bonds while being online?
We, doing different activities in the space that leverage the fact that you're online can be really helpful in creating that community, right? You can't, just like Sienna's saying, you can't recreate the same kind of connection in an online space. You almost have to reimagine what connection looks like. And some of that is through a playfulness of Gather Town, is what we've specifically utilized at Oasis. But also we have an activity where we have the youth reflect specifically on a story about writing a letter to someone who helps them be their authentic self. And Sienna, I wonder if you could talk about that experience and if it made you feel connected or not, and what that looked like.
Yeah, I really liked that. It was, because it was all anonymous. I used Jamboard, and everybody got a random slide, and you just started writing about a person who inspired you or helped you. Yeah, whatever it was. And then we just all went through and read everybody's, and it was really I definitely felt more connected to everybody after, because I don't know, it's kind of like a practice what you preach type of thing. You show your vulnerability and then you receive it and you feel good about it because you're not the only one being vulnerable and you see everybody else's vulnerability.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Annika, what about your experience?
Yeah, I feel like one of the things that I've found, especially with Instagram and platforms that kind of allow you to come whenever you want to and you can see the information when you want to makes it a little bit easier in my mind, because like you all were saying, being online and on a screen all the time can get really like can involve a lot of burnout. And with Instagram, I know a lot of youth that turn to like doom scrolling on Instagram as an escape, which wasn't necessarily the greatest thing, but was a way that they were able to find a different experience with still being online and being connected. But it's kind of the like come when you want to, and you can see things and engage with things when you want to and when you have the energy to do that. So I found it's been really beneficial to reach youth through that platform. But also it kind of can get harder because it's just we're hoping that people see it and share our content and want to interact with our content, which can also get a little bit more difficult because a lot of people don't have the energy to do that, especially in this COVID world. But yeah.
Absolutely. So that balance of not really having a solid commitment, which allows people a little more agency, makes it a little more accessible, but then is also the thing that makes sustainability a concern. Awesome. And Lily?
Yeah, I'm also like a lot of people, I started college all online. And a lot of people talk about how college is a place where you find friends and you find community and you kind of step into that new chapter of your life. And I feel like I've been all online, both freshman and sophomore year, closing out my sophomore year online. And there's definite things I can feel that I've missed. But also on the flip side, weaving in work and school and my social life and home life is a lot easier virtually. Logging into my class 10 o'clock in the morning instead of going all the way down to Denver to take one class. There are pros and cons to that, but I can take my class at home. I could take it somewhere else. Flexibility is just a lot more easy. But again, with in-person things, it's a lot harder sometimes. But there's some definite availability issues, availability advantages of being online, accessibility, and yeah.
How have you seen that specifically play out for Outboulder and your youth programs?
Mm-hmm. So we went all virtual for about, I think until this year we went hybrid, and then we went all into in person with our middle school and high school youth group, and we've noticed a lot of ups and downs with in person and virtual. So middle school group would be really popular one week and then not very popular the next week. High school group seemingly just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So there was definite easier boundaries when it comes to getting the Zoom link out. So just like sending it all to the moderated Discord channel that we have, saying, hey, youth group is about to start. Join in here. They're like, oh, cool, I have time for that today. And they can just log in, and it's a lot more discreet too. So a lot of people don't have transportation to our building. And so they can join from Fort Collins, they can join from Broomfield. They don't need a ride from a parent or guardian or a bus or something like that. So accessibility was really big too.
Thank you. Ray, what about your experience?
Our experience with digital spaces has been a little bit all over the place. We have identified some pretty significant limitations, mostly in terms of burnout. I think everybody after about 2 years is pretty sick of staring at their screen, of talking into a camera, of looking at their own box instead of having the opportunity to really interact with their peers. Other limitations we see include participants feeling unsafe at home, especially discussing some of the issues that we broach in PBJ and our hotspot mapping sessions, or even in our prevention education sessions. Pretty significantly, the interactions that we glean out of our online focus groups are very limited. It's difficult to have a conversation and a real connection with somebody else through a screen online. We've also had issues with the legitimacy of our participants when we're trying to conduct focus groups, of participants signing up for a session from different parts of the country or even outside of the country who have nothing to do with the audiences that we're trying to reach. because they're attracted to gift cards. They're attracted to the ways we're interested in compensating participants for their time, for their energy. Technology accessibility has also been a bit of an issue for us in terms of making sure all of our participants have access to both internet and hardware in order to access our services. And it's also pretty difficult for us as educators to have a really trauma-informed response to participants when we are this detached from things like their nonverbal cues and energy. That being said, it has been really supportive for us in trying to create as trauma-informed of a space as we can. Working online allows participants to manage the interactions that they have with others, whether it happens to be turning on or off their camera, interacting through a text chat, a voice chat. And for our focus groups, it allows our participants to change their names for our data collecting purposes. It allows participants to control their own physical spaces, whether it's being around their favorite pet or in their favorite spot of sun. It also mitigates any sort of issues surrounding transportation accessibility. It's safer for immunocompromised individuals, and online spaces are mostly sober spaces, really supporting a much wider group of young people.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I think it's really important for us as service providers to be able to name the complexities of trying to do online spaces and being able to succinctly name both the limitations, but then also some of the benefits that come with it. And hearing you say all of that, I was thinking about Lily's response of like that moderated Discord channel versus you're like, we're getting people who just want our gift cards because it's public. And so just really thinking of all of the different choices that we have to make depending on the type of programming that we're trying to do. And so I really appreciate the wide array of ways that everyone on this panel has been contacting youth and navigating these different channels, because I think it gives us a really good idea of all of the options and a more realistic view of some of the consequences as well. So Ray, to continue to put you on the spot, I would love to know what youth indicated as important to them regarding unsafe or safe digital spaces in your hotspot mapping data, and just kind of a little bit about what you found there.
Sure. For some background, in 2021, we were able to conduct hotspot mapping with about 200 high schoolers, asking questions, soliciting discussions and feedback surrounding their safety online, specifically on social media platforms. We talked a little bit about spaces where participants felt safe and unsafe and why, and then recommendations that they might have that we could pass along to app developers. And largely, students were concerned about what they were being exposed to online without their consent and their privacy. Students felt really disturbed seeing things that their peers might like or retweet on Twitter that they didn't choose to follow or engage with. They were upset about being exposed to certain ads or accounts on Instagram that promoted an unrealistic or otherwise destructive body image. They were really concerned about their information being shared without their consent and about their privacy being violated. And those were the really key findings surrounding almost all of the social media platforms that they engaged with. And this, after some analysis, kind of helped us shape our work a little bit in terms of creating a more trauma-informed space by creating a space that is predictable, a space that is safe with established norms and expectations, a space where young people can come in to participate and know what they're going to expect, and a space where we can include things like trigger warnings to support all of the young people that we work with.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much. And so Annika and Sienna, whoever wants to answer this first, really curious around what you all think are things that are most important to you, and thinking about organizations creating digital spaces to engage youth. What would be the most important things to consider? And yeah, whichever wants to go first.
Okay. Because she's just gonna stare at me through the screen. Anyways, I think it's really important to consider just kind of, we've already kind of gone around this, but the fact that youth are so burnt out right now and there's so much and it's such a heavy thing to like even log on to something online, that but it also, I found like being in supported spaces can still be, it's really sustaining and fulfilling. And so like, it's great to have those spaces balance out kind of the monotony and the like less supportive spaces of just being online in class, because that doesn't feel quite the same, and giving youth a place to socialize. One thing I think that like, I'm on the One Colorado GSA Leadership Council as well, the Gender Sexuality Alliance Leadership Council. One thing that they and the YAC has done really well is building in space to have social time. Like we have a connection circle every week in YAC where we just like talk and ask each other questions that isn't related to the work we're doing, in order to kind of build that supportive space so that we do have the energy to do this more important and heavier advocacy work. And I found that it just kind of, that has helped make it more of the sustainable space for me, in order to like give me the energy to continue to come back every week, as opposed to feeling so drained of logging on my computer every time. I don't know, Sienna, if you want to add anything.
Yeah, no, totally. The connection circles are great, especially like they do what they say. They are connection circles. Everybody connects after. It's a really, really great. It's so fun. Something else that we've done in the past, we don't do it that much anymore, especially since we're in person as of right now, is when we were mainly online, we would do like online games. We would have like either a break in the middle or something at the end where we would, whoever was planning the meeting would pick a game, and then we would all participate in it. And that was also like a form of connecting, where we all just got to like have fun together for like maybe 20 minutes max, but it was still really important because we're not getting the social time that we're used to getting.
Perfect. Thank you for sharing that insight. And if I can ask, can you give an example of what those connection circles look like, or some of the things that you all do in them?
Yeah, so I think, oh gosh, one time we had a very enlightening discussion about everyone's favorite, like if you had to pick one sauce for the rest of your life, what sauce would it be? And there was some people had lots of opinions about, and then also like, I think one time we were talking about like pizza toppings, and it can be something silly, and we like get so I think there was a very hearty debate about what belongs on pizza as well, because it just like, it's something fun that we can engage with that is more sustaining and is able to like give us a better understanding of who each other is. And it's still like, it's fun and it's silly, and it kind of makes it a little bit easier to kind of take a break from everything else that's going on.
Absolutely. Oh, Jax, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll say that for those of you who might be thinking that's a restorative justice practice, it is. It comes from restorative justice practices, and it's intended to be so that we have a space and a structure and a way to engage, to know each other, as Annika and Sienna were saying, and to engage if harm were to happen in the group, a way to structure that. Sometimes we've asked questions that dig a little deeper, what was something wise you heard recently, or who is a mentor of yours and why, that gets a little bit more like folks' values and deep passions. That's a really important part of connection circles too.
Perfect. Thank you for adding that. And I definitely want to talk more about the restorative practices lens a little bit later. We definitely have a question that I think applies to that. So moving on to the next one. Lily, I'll start with you again. So what are the implicit and explicit norms of your digital space? How are they enforced? And then how do relationships play a role?
That's a great question. So just a little background on my role at OBC. So I'm a youth that went through the youth program at Boulder County. I found Boulder via a field trip in 2018, and I was onboarded on staff during COVID. So just as COVID was getting kind of up and running. Yeah, during youth group, no matter if anyone's new or just to really enforce and everyone knows the community norms, we read off community norms, and Jax is very well versed with these as well. We share during every youth group. So So examples are, we are free to explore new identities and try new names and pronouns whenever we want. We respect each other's privacy and safety by not sharing who is a part of group with others. If we run into someone outside of group, remember that people may go by different names and pronouns. And then there's also rules for specific online spaces. So we have a one mic, one diva rule. So we share airtime, and when someone is speaking, we are listening. And then, so if someone walks through the screen, please mute your mic when you are not talking to eliminate background noise, respectful of virtual space by engaging, things like that, no taking photos without anyone's consent, things like that. And then we also, every volunteer and OBC staff that interact with youth in our youth groups are mandatory reporters. So there are certain things that are required by law to report: abuse or neglect, sexual contact, any relationship that doesn't fall under the consent laws of Colorado, things like that. So volunteers are very well versed, as well as youth program people as well. So everyone's very well versed in dealing with those sort of crises and interventions, things like that.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's a really solid mix of community norms as far as like how you relate to one another, but then also the logistics of this is how we're going to share the space. This is how we're going to mute our mics. And I remember just when I met up with you all and hearing those norms listed, it was very explicit and very direct. And so before I move on to anyone else, I kind of want to jump over to Ray, if that's okay with you, to kind of ask how you see that translating the need for really explicit and clear community norms in digital spaces from community organizations, from the responses that you received from students in hotspot mapping.
Sure. Another big finding that came up during hotspot mapping was participants feeling really blocked out by terms and conditions of certain apps, especially with their concern for wanting to know where their information was going, where their data was going. Young people wanted to know what those terms and conditions said, and they were incredibly inaccessible in terms of how small the text were, in terms of the jargon that was used. And they were really eager to see a clearly spelled out set of norms, expectations, and rules. So in terms of setting those expectations clearly and outright, there's a much better understanding of how people can interact with one another and should be interacting with one another. Similarly, those expectations are put forward, and there's a better understanding of when individuals are not following those expectations, providing a clear avenue for taking action to make the space safer for everybody.
Awesome. And so I guess just off of that, what has been the experience with SPAN, and particularly I think with that second part of responding, especially in the peers building justice spaces and things like that, how have you responded to enforcing the norms and those agreements?
Yeah, I think Jax touched on this earlier, but talking about building community, citing those expectations clearly, and utilizing restorative justice practices, identifying that people were harmed by certain behaviors, and then taking actions not only to mitigate that harm, but then restore relationships that might have been hurt because of those actions. We find it supportive to identify how these actions violated our norms and expectations, and how they caused harm to other individuals, and then in certain situations ask for a change in behavior. And if that behavior continues, taking more drastic actions. We talked about using specific platforms earlier. Zoom is great for being able to remove disruptive participants, should that be the case. But we find it really important to follow up with all parties involved, and then begin that restorative justice practice of identifying which norms are broken, and then working on building that community back better after harm has occurred.
And I would Just to keep following up, how has that happened by and large when you have had those scenarios? How has the community bounced back from that? What has it been like to welcome folks back in and rebuild that trust? How has that gone?
We haven't had too much of an issue with this happening. I think it's very, very limited and anecdotal because we do make it a point to establish group norms beforehand, make sure they're clearly understood and widely accessible, especially over the course of certain sessions. And during some sessions, we'll leave those norms up for participants to view while we're having our discussions. Normally, I think a lot of these sorts of behaviors can be linked to participants feeling burnt out and wanting to shake their online experience up a little bit. But largely, it hasn't been problematic. And once it's checked the first time, it has been successful in identifying, you're violating our norms, you're hurting our community, please change your behavior. And things have been okay.
Awesome, thank you. Annika, I'm really interested in hearing your experience with the norms with VBSD survivors, how you enforce them, how relationships play a role, especially on Instagram.
Yeah. I think especially with Instagram, it feels like Instagram is like the quintessential cyberbullying platform because it just like is so easy to sit behind a screen and comment something nasty and like then move on from it. And because for some reason some people feel compelled to do something like that. So we've had our fair share of those kinds of comments. So generally we will take down those comments. We've had a couple times when people were really insistent on just continuing to say things, especially when we were sharing stuff about the first walkout in response to the conclusion of the trial that was related to Fairview. A lot of people were really passionate about supporting the perpetrator who was acquitted. So we had to just kind of take those comments down, and eventually we chose to block those accounts. But we want it to be that it's a space that like is supportive and empowering, and we kind of have a no tolerance policy for that kind of comments because we don't want it to be that impacts the survivors' experience of being supported and feeling like their stories being heard. And then I feel like it's also just really important to make sure that like that platform is cultivated as just being there to support survivors and not tolerating any of that kind of language or comments. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. And then Jackson Sienna.
I don't have the full list of our norms, but the ones I can think of off the top of my head are the confidentiality. A lot of them are the same as like Boulder County, other groups like that. Confidentiality, name and pronouns can change all the time and everybody respects it. Be kind, be respectful. I mean, really like pretty straightforward things typically, I would think. Jax, do you have more of the like actual norms?
Yeah, what I'll share about the reason that they're very similar to Out Boulder is because I believe that the ones that Lily shared were actually established in QTs, our social support group, about 10 years ago by the youth. And so like it was a decided on approach. I imagine they've been, shifted or added to, but as that group has been a collaboration in the last 5 or 6 years between Out Boulder and Oasis, those norms were established by the youth in collaboration with the adults in the space. And that's why they're shared among our different programs here in Boulder County. Confidentiality is really important in this work, and I'll share that specifically we are able to operate under confidentiality because we're providing mental health services. And so in the state of Colorado, for youth 12 and over, they can access mental health services without parental consent specifically. And so that means that they can access our services without me having to call parents and ask if they're allowed to be there. And I'll just share that as a norm in the space because then it makes it so that youth who maybe don't have safe spaces at home can be safe in our space or safer in our Brave space with us.
Awesome. Is there a specific, I guess, way in which the norms are upheld, or a way in which people are reminded of them? Can you speak a little bit to that process for me?
Are you asking me that question? Sorry.
Yep.
Yeah. In the YAC, Youth Advocating for Change, we do not go over our norms each week. But we do in QTs, just like with the other older programs, we name them at the very beginning. But as far as, for example, if harm were to occur, we have open communication with the youth between a handful of adult folks in the room, that we can then collaborate together to decide how the youth want to direct the response specifically. And so we will bring it to the group. We often won't bring up who has brought the harm to the group if it isn't very specific. We give them a lot of agency in how they want to engage the challenge, or puzzle that's coming up, or harm that they feel like they're experiencing. But for the most part, what I would say is people are experiencing things internally and want to learn how to share it in their community to find support, less so that there's like explicit harm done in the space going against someone's boundaries, for example. Just the YAC is a youth leadership space, and so we just don't see that as often. And I also, in the time that I've been with Oasis, haven't really seen it in QTs either, which is our social support group. So I don't know if anyone else in the room has some examples of that, but I haven't seen any yet.
Okay, so I kind of already led us here, but specifically around harming groups, did anyone have anything else that you wanted to add around, I guess, any lessons learned of ways of responding to harm, or channels that you found? I know, Annika, you spoke about Instagram definitely being a place where that happens a lot. I guess, Lily, I'm really curious around the moderated Discord channel, if you could speak a little bit more to that, just because I know it's something that's a little more moderated.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a youth Discord, which is open for, so the link is pretty hard to find. So it's usually directly found through, the only people that can create links are moderators. So Jenna, Chris, and I, the only people on the youth programs team at Boulder County. And we have a list of words that give us warnings if certain things are said. So like, suicide or any like trigger word that someone would write, it would ping us in the chat directly so that we were able to like ping us to our phones, and we would directly see what was said. And we also have a lot of norms for the chat. So norms around content warnings, that to not share super graphic details, that everyone knows that our direct messages are open, and everyone has our work numbers that they can text or call at any time for resources or crisis help, things like that. But it's a really great space for youth to just chat. Like, they send memes. We have this fun bot that they can race snails. So just a lot of fun things that they can just like hang out, and it's moderated on the weekend via me. So I check in the chat 30 minutes a day and just look through the chat and see if anything alarming comes up. And then I send a update to Jenna and Chris Sunday night. And yeah, so it's just a great little place for youth to have community and things like that.
Awesome, thank you. Curious if anyone else wants to add anything on different channels that you have seen easier to moderate, more difficult, things of that nature.
This is a little bit, probably, I think some people might have experienced this as well, but I know that for me, Zoom is a lot easier to moderate and deal with when there's harm occurring than like Google Meet, because last April, there was a Title IX Advisory Council with the district. We held an intro meeting, and it was like completely crashed, and we had a couple people who were joining just to like mess with it, and we couldn't like actually hold the meeting at all. We ended up shutting it down entirely, and it was because we couldn't like remove people from it. And I remember like afterwards, we were all kind of really frustrated and overwhelmed by the fact that like that had happened in our space, and we weren't able to kind of kick those people out because Google Meet is so much harder to moderate than something like Zoom. But it also comes with, additional services, because Google Meet's also easier to navigate sometimes. But I found that was one big issue. I know people have heard of Zoom bombing too, which has happened before, and just really unfortunate, because I think it's invading like these spaces that we're supposed to be making supportive spaces for youth. And it's frustrating to see that happen. And then it also can kind of turn youth away from it and deter them from wanting to continue to engage in those kind of spaces.
Absolutely. Other thoughts? Ray, I just keep going back to people wanting to join your focus group who have nothing to do with it, because it's something that I wouldn't have considered. And so one, how have you found out when that's occurred? And then two, what have you done in those situations? Or three, what could you do differently? Three-part question.
Sure. This was a couple weeks ago, actually. We are in the process of conducting hotspot mapping, learning about safety in the University Hill area near CU in Boulder. There's a lot of partying that happens there, quite a few frats and sororities. And just this year, a pretty tall list of sexual violence that's occurred. So we are interested in learning about safety in that area and working with decision makers to make a positive change for not only students who occupy the area, but residents and faculty members who might interact with the area as well as the community at large. So we were interested in conducting focus groups, both in person and online, and compensating participants with a gift card for their time and thoughts and energy. Being that we're interacting online, we were sharing links to both a more quantitative survey, as well as a link to participate in a focus group collecting qualitative data. This link to our focus group got out apparently on Twitter, where it was shared a whole bunch along the lines of saying, sign up for the focus group, participate, get a $10 gift card. And there was no information shared about Boulder or CU at all. So we learned that in the first focus group session, participants weren't really able to identify any of the rationale behind their responses. So questions including, what areas feel safe and why, what areas feel unsafe and why. Participants identified an area on the map that we provided and couldn't really participate further in this discussion. Couldn't really share any other details at all about the area, about the Hill, about Boulder, about CU, about Colorado even. So we had some suspicions, and that kind of paired with the fact that when they were signing up, their time zone was shared with us, and there were participants part of the Eastern time zone, part of an East Africa time zone. From there, we made the decision to shut down, kind of reset our list of focus group participants and open it up only to individuals with a valid CU email address to really kind of tighten the number of individuals we're looking to reach, but also the community we're looking to reach. We decided to scale back and say, instead of anybody who has anything to do with Boulder and the Hill, let's talk only to current students, alumni, and faculty. And it's worked well so far. We haven't had any issues since then, but it was definitely a pretty big learning curve. We were mostly interested in compensating our participants, and that kind of turned into turn into anybody trying to get a gift card, which was a little bit frustrating, but we've been able to pivot since then and solve the problem more or less.
Awesome. Thank you for adding that. So because we are a MESA, this is perhaps, in my opinion, the most important question of the night. So if sexual violence resource centers are seeking to deliver or services and content digitally in conjunction with in-person services, what might youth find engaging and what would you consider best practices? So we'll start with Jax and Sienna.
I mean, I would honestly, like, I think about all of the online places and like communities I've been in, and I think if you're gonna do something like a Google Meet where it's like an online, you want to have some type of online space, GatherTown is something that is really, really good and a really, really, like, you can make it's just so much better because it makes it feel like it doesn't make you don't feel like you're in person, but you feel more connected to people. You feel more like you're in person, and it's more of that type of feeling. Also, like we were talking about before, like connection circles and games and things that allow people to be social as well as like doing whatever else the main focus of the spaces is really helpful, I think.
I think starting with asking youth is a great start. Hybrid spaces are going to become more and more of a ubiquitous experience. That was a dumb big word, of a general experience. And I think it's important for us to kind of get on board to make spaces accessible. The pandemic really made it visible. It made the inaccessibility of spaces very visible. But of course, people knew this pre-pandemic, that hybrid spaces make conferences, make events more accessible. And so thinking about ways to do that, but hold that with integrity is really important, because it doesn't just mean putting a Facebook Live, for example, but instead means dedicated time and planning.
Just to follow up with that, Jax, I guess what has your experience been, and especially as groups have pivoted both to online and to hybrid, what has that planning time been like, and how much time would you suggest dedicating?
That's a big question. I appreciate it though. I think that I was just talking to someone today about over planning can be a problem, like overthinking something to the point where you're no longer focused in on the actual goal can be a problem. But I'd say that for our the one online space we host right now, we're probably spending collectively about 2 hours a week on it, on top of the actual space. So planning, discussing with Outfolder, thinking about our activities, thinking about how to make those activities accessible in an online space. Just tonight we did collaborative poetry writing, and we had to figure out a way to do that that didn't include a piece of paper you folded, right? And so also recognizing that online is different than in person. And I said this at the beginning, but like, it's not just about taking an activity that was typically online and making it typically in person, figuring out how to make it go online, but it's about thinking, okay, how do I leverage that I'm online? How do we use this as a place to play games or meet together in a virtual game space as well? Or how do I leverage watching movies or doing things together in online spaces? I think I answered that question.
Yeah, thank you. Ray, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think creating online spaces for young people starts with asking young people what it is that they want to experience, what they want out of their experience online, and what they want their space to look like. I think for providers, it's important to provide that trauma-informed space and make sure that you are using that online space to its full advantage. I think it's also important to take steps to make it interesting and engaging, right? Take steps to mitigate those drawbacks of having an online space by doing things that the other panelists had suggested, by making it fun, by taking time to intentionally build relationships and build community and make it a space where people want to be. They feel some sort of ownership over the space. And I think bringing it back to creating a space for young people, it's important to also intentionally, explicitly collect feedback from young people about what they want their space to be, about how they want their space to change. Most importantly, I think, like I've been saying, a youth serving space shouldn't be created without the input and feedback of the young people that it's serving.
Absolutely. Lily, your thoughts?
Yeah, just kind of echo what Ray and Jack said. At the end of the year, we have surveys for youth to fill out about youth groups, about youth programming in general, and what they would like to see changes, what they like, what activities they liked, what activities they don't like. And we really implement that for the next year. So if it's as small as like a snack that they want at youth group, or as big as doing some sort of activity, bringing in MESA to do a panel or as a special guest or something like that. We really listen to what they want and what they want to see reflected in the youth groups and youth programming, because it is their space, and we don't know until we ask.
Absolutely. Annika, what are your thoughts?
I feel like kind of what everyone else is saying. I think it's really important to tailor your virtual space and what you're using it for to the youth that you're providing this support, this content, this programming for, because it is kind of their space to be supported, to be empowered to do whatever the purpose of the space is. I know with YAC, we focus on connecting with each other, but we also, we're a leadership group and we're looking to do advocacy in the community. And so that kind of ties into the way we engage with each other and a little bit the programming that we do in that group, because we have to make space for that, as opposed to like purely social groups. And I think it's kind of important to just give youth kind of the space to connect with each other. Like, we love being social. I know, like, there are some times when we go over in meetings because we're just talking to each other for too much because we get really excited and we talk a lot and we like to do that. And I think the fact that we're now able to do that a little bit more because we've developed these virtual spaces means that kind of youth are looking for that social engagement with each other now more than ever, because we've missed out on so much of it, as well as like giving them a space for it to be supportive, empowering, and kind of making sure that, like, I think like everyone's been saying, that the programming is there for them and helping them grow and learn new things, and that it's actually being productive for them, I suppose, in doing what it is that we're looking to do with the space, and in addition to giving them a space to connect, I guess.
Yeah, I think that last sentence really summed up a lot of what I'm hearing, which is that balance of what the actual goal and purpose is with that need for community and rapport. And so I was taking just a little bit of notes as all of you are talking, to kind of summarize some of the best practices that I'm hearing. And please feel free to unmute yourself afterwards and tell me if I've missed anything. But what I'm hearing is definitely the need for a lot of ownership and youth direction, right? But whether that's explicitly collecting feedback from young people as afterwards, or asking them to be involved in the planning stages, really being intentional around balancing the goal of the group with what channels we're choosing. I definitely learned a lot about Discord because I really didn't know much about it. So really even trying to get their input on, where do you want this to occur? I really liked the comment around predictability and playfulness. I think both of those at the same time are really important. And so how can we create those consistent norms in a platform that is also consistent, while also being playful, as Jaxie pointed out, and creative with the space? And really just focusing on those terms and conditions. Like, how can we make it as explicit as possible so that ambiguity isn't there? So they know what to expect for themselves. They know what to expect if things are, if harm is done, and really maximizing their agency. So you all had also spoken to, like, if they can chat versus like turning their camera on versus scrolling on Instagram or going to a group every week. And so just all of the different ways that we can really amplify agency sounds like some of the biggest things that we've touched on. And so another question that's come up for me in hearing this is just, what does a trauma-informed space look like online? And I'm just throwing things at you.
I think that a trauma-informed space doesn't hold tightly to perfection. A trauma-informed space is ready to hold truth softly. And a trauma-informed space also holds inconsistencies and doesn't expect like clear linear outcomes. Something that I've been reminding my team is that working with teens and youth is not about the outcome. The work that we do at Oasis specifically, which is leadership development and creating spaces for mentorship and creating relationships, is specifically about those relationships. And so trauma-informed spaces that way is recognizing, like, my job is to create a relationship. It is not to find a solution. It is not to make all the bad things go away. We can't. But I can make it so that you trust me. We can work together to do anything I can to make it so that young people trust me and see me as a person that they will come to. And that is, that's an important thing in our trauma-informed space that I'm always focusing on.
Thank you so much, Jax. Does anyone else want to add anything on that?
A little piece. Yeah, like kind of echoing what Jax is saying. For me as a youth, I went through the youth program. I continue to look to Jenna. Jenna is a very trusted adult in my life. And as I was going through the youth program, very, very strict boundaries, but also very trustworthy of this person, and the empowerment-based practices that they did during leadership retreats, youth groups, field trips, things like that felt strength-based, felt like a collaboration between youth and the youth program, and always putting safety first. And especially when it comes to intersectionality programming for queer, trans people of color, acknowledging those intersectionalities and creating strength-based practices and programming for youth that live life within multiple different marginal identities, things like that.
Perfect. Thank you, Lily. Well, we haven't received any questions in the Q&A. Is there anything that anyone on the panel wants to add that we haven't already touched on? I definitely want to leave space for that. Otherwise, we can leave one more minute for a Q&A. Interested in hearing y'all's thoughts. Cool. I really appreciate all of you just spending your evening with us and sharing all of your expertise and wisdom and experience, and really making this a balanced conversation around all of the considerations that organizations need to hold when thinking about, cultivating those safe online spaces, particularly with youth and particularly in the sexual violence field, and anything related to trauma-informed care. So I just really appreciate you all being here with us, and thank you to all of the attendees. I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.